Henry Kissinger says there's a lesson to be drawn here for Chinese leaders, who he says should reflect on how to avoid getting into the same situation that Vladimir Putin now finds himself in. If that's the case, what is that important lesson? And should China, as you say, remain neutral and play that role as a stabilizer?
China, of course, is not involved in this war at all, but given China's importance, people definitely would want to find out how China might be doing. I firmly respect this kind of consideration, but that, however, that would not suggest that China would behave like Russia. I think Henry Kissinger's comment would have a lot of reference to the possible scenario of the mainland having a war with Taiwan. But I don't believe that is quite likely now, given that our law of anti-secession has actually laid down very clearly three conditions if the mainland has to use force. That is, if Taiwan declares independence, which I don't believe is quite possible, because they know that would invite mainland China's use of force. The second is some external forces trying to separate Taiwan from mainland China. That might be wishes of some countries, but again, it's very difficult for them to carry that out. The third thing is, if the mainland China concludes that the possibility of peaceful reunification is exhausted, then the mainland might resort to use of force. So I think the most important thing, therefore, is that the Taiwan authorities would give the mainland hopes that peaceful reunification can still be achieved one day. I'm talking about peaceful reunification.
Well, Dr. Kissinger also thinks it's unwise to be adversarial towards two adversaries in a bid to drive them together. With Russia and Ukraine as the context, how do you think Washington can recalibrate its China policy if indeed is interested in doing so in the first place?
In the past, Washington's policy basically is to fight two major wars at the same time. Nowadays, I have some doubts whether they could actually manage two major competitions at the same time, because certainly China doesn't want this kind of competition. China is still talking about cooperation, but this is what comes out from the United States, that they would insist that this is a competitive relationship, taking both China and Russia as strategic competitors. Well, the war in Ukraine certainly would siphon away Americans' attention and resources, at least for a while. But definitely the United States would come back to Asia to focus on China, if possible. And the ongoing visit of President Biden actually is an example. He's touring around. He didn't mention China that directly, but the focus is of course on China. But how successful can his visit be? I really have some doubts, because he's selling his Indo-Pacific economic framework that basically is about some ambiguous common standards. You know, the Asia Pacific doesn't need some common standards. They want, a kind of tolerance of different standards altogether, because the countries in this region are so diverse.
Well, let's finish up with this as the conflict in Ukraine continues. Of course, the humanitarian crisis there also continues to evolve. What then happens next for China?
I think China has been trying its best to strike a balance between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, we have some sympathies with Russia's claim that the root cause is NATO's expansion. Previously, all Russian leaders since Mikhail Gorbachev warned against the expansions, but the West doesn't necessarily heed these warnings until this time. With Ukraine, China has been providing us humanitarian assistance, and we have pledged that we'll continue to do so. So this is not our war, but we try our best to strike a balance and to make our efforts acceptable to all.
It's a great pleasure speaking to you as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James.